But given that Chris has given the government spiel, and I have followed Alfred's very interesting remarks, and I was given notes on remarks made by Adrian and Gordon. I'd rather go off the cuff and make some remarks myself on where I see all this going. First of all, I think that the most important statement is that the Eurozone is a political project. And that is the peculiarity of it all, and that is why it defies logic. In the sense that one of the most interesting questions I get when traveling, especially to the States and to Asia, are the basic questions on the solidity of the Eurozone governance system. And it comes out from the simple fact that if analyzed from a very objective method, the Eurozone governance system lacks proper governance when it comes to the economic part. There isn't a convergence, there isn't until now a one-size-fits-all. And to people who would rely solely on textbook cases, this is unthinkable. They would say such a project has no future. But then, I think these questions would come from those who don't realize the degree of commitment, very substantial political commitment that there is in favor of this project. Without disclosing anything which is confidential, but I think some of the points had hit the headlines at the time, so I'm just relying on those publicly available facts. I could witness all this firsthand the night we basically bailed out Greece once again. Antonio was there on the original night, I was there on that other fateful night. It was, I believe, 15 hours of negotiation around the table, strenuous negotiations. It wasn't anything technical. The technical people have told us this is where we can arrive, this is what we can do. It's up to the politicians now. And at the end of the day, this is where I think that the Brexit negotiations will lead. It will be up to the politicians to then decide what can be done, what shouldn't be done, what has to be done. And on that night, the sense that prevailed was that we needed to take a political decision on whether we wanted the Eurozone to stay alive or whether we wanted to kill it. It boiled down to that. So it wasn't about numbers, it wasn't about details, it wasn't about technical papers, it was about political will. And there was unflinching political will from all those around the table that the Eurozone is here to stay. And I do believe that that was a very concrete signal that started the sort of marginal growth that we're seeing now within the Eurozone, and that has helped calm the market at the time. Because at the end of the day, we are at the mercy of market forces, whether we want it or not. Secondly, I do believe that the Eurozone we're discussing today is really and truly not the Eurozone in itself, but the regulation which we are faced with each and every day in different sectors. And most of that regulation, I'm sorry to say, is the result of knee-jerk reactions coming from the 2008 crisis, which in itself, most of that regulation is right in scope. Its aim and its targets are excellent. It's about preventing other systemic crises, it's about defending consumers' interests, it's about protecting the small investor. But then again, there is this common Brussels-like mistake of going large on regulation, trying to draft regulation that needs to fit everyone, and with very, very little scope of maneuver. And at points, it leads to directives which when read, would seem very much common sense. So I think most of you are familiar with MiFID II. MiFID II is a very common sense approach directive to, amongst others, protecting consumer interests. But when you speak to practitioners on the ground, they'll tell you, yes, well and good. But the burden that's being put on the practitioner is such that it's locking out of the market the small investors. No one will spend so much time on KYC, on the whole compliance thing for a 50,000 euro investment. I will accept only investors who are willing to invest €500,000 upwards. That leaves the smaller investors out of the market really. So there is, and there should be, and I think this is where we should go at the end of the day, and that is where we should be, we should lead the brigade at European level, and that was what we're trying to do. Saying yes to regulation, but it has to be a sensible type of regulation. Some use the phrase smart regulation. I also want to be very frank in using this opportunity, in dispelling this myth that somehow Malta is lacking when it comes to enforcement of EU rules. I was thrilled the other day to read a table that was published by an international source, and I fail to remember the source exactly, saying that Malta, together with 3 other countries, is the top enforcer when it comes to EU rules across the board. I will not say who's at the bottom of the table. The fact is that I think we underestimate ourselves sometimes. And really and truly, when I take a look around me at the practitioners and the regulators, yes, we have our gaps to fill, but I think we have a very, very solid system. At the end of the day also, I do believe that Malta, though if we take the stability and growth package, has been touted quite a number of times today. Yes, Malta fell foul of the excessive deficit procedure a number of times, but there are other rules where Malta has not fallen foul over the past few years. So today the debate is not dominated by the Stability and Growth Pact. It is almost mission impossible to change that pact. So I'm more interested in the debate on the six-pack, which was adopted in 2011, and the other regulations. And one of the rules in the six-pack says that no country can run a trade surplus of more than 6% for more than 3 years. There is a country that does that, and that's Germany. I'm not saying that there should be any sort of actions being taken against Germany. I think that the Germans, it's quite absurd to think that the German Chancellor can do something to tell its automotive industry, stop, you need to be less competitive than the others. It begs disbelief that someone wrote a regulation thinking that any policymaker can make his or her own industry less competitive to get a smaller surplus. On the other hand, there are ways and means by means of which that surplus can be bridged by, say, expenditure on infrastructure. I do believe that at the end of the day, my point is that all these rules should be reviewed in a way to match the reality test. I'll give you another example. If you look at the way in which our banks in Europe are examined for their systemic risk to the whole system, it's creating an imbalance in smaller countries. Why? Because some of the banks over here can pose a systemic risk to our system, but are irrelevant, to say the truth, at a European level. Nevertheless, they have to take on the burden of regulation, which is disproportionate because of the way in which some of the regulation has been written. And this is not about government, any government really, negotiating for a better world. This is about the need for a change in mindset at European level. And that is why I'm one of those who favors a multi-speed approach to Europe. I think that there should be an opportunity for those countries that need to move forward in certain policy areas to be allowed to do so. It's already happening. It's happening in the Eurozone. The Eurozone is a concept of multi-speed Europe where it's not all the 28 or 27 taking part, but it's just part of those member states wanting to move forward. Now we have the defense mechanism, whatever it's called, the newly launched defense mechanism. We opted to stay out for now of the system, and our line of thought is, why should we prevent France, Italy, other countries from moving ahead in defense cooperation just because we have a neutrality clause? No, we should not prevent them from doing so. We should mark our territory, we should say what our, at the end of the day, our priorities are, but we should not be there to stop others from being and working closer together. There will be other areas where we will be looking forward to being part of the very, very core, say, when it comes to a more social acquis, for example. So I think this is the way in which we can move forward in a sensible manner. Finally, I do believe, as Chris was saying, that we are managing to attract sensible business to the country. I do believe that the core, the key word in all this is innovation. And innovation is not limited to laboratories. Innovation can be found even in the simplest of products and even in the simplest of services. Innovation is the key to the game, and it will help us continue to have a differentiated economy and spread our wings for better growth in the future. One final word about the European Monetary Fund that Alfred was mentioning. This will be one of the big debates in the next few months, even when it comes to the name in itself, because as some people, I believe, in the ECB are saying, it is a misnomer to call it European Monetary Fund, because monetary policy is in the hands of the central bank, and it shows lack of understanding from politicians to call something EMF just to have a substitute for the IMF, when the IMF comes from a different concept, from a different culture, from the Bretton Woods Agreement, and so on. So apart from the debate on what this should be called, I'm very intrigued on this EMF thing. And the debate will be on the sort of governance. And there are two main schools of thought. The first, so why do we need this mechanism? This mechanism is needed because if something like Greece happens again, it is quite humiliating for Europe to have to rely on a troika made up of three institutions, two of which are not European. And I think that's very humiliating at the end of the day. So there needs to be proper setup for a European sort of structure. The debate will be whether this fund, this mechanism, is governed by the Commission or by technical people from the Commission, or whether it should be something where the governments, someone who is elected, has some sort of control. I think that will be those will be the dividing lines, and we are starting to go through the process to see what suits our interests best when it comes to this new mechanism that will be in place. Finally, I do believe I'm not the biggest of fans of the ECB, but I think Governor Draghi did a wonderful job. I think with just one phrase on one day, he saved the whole Eurozone project when he said, we will do whatever it takes. And that single phrase managed to turn the tide around. His quantitative easing approach has led to the results we're seeing, yes, coupled with the low oil prices and other things at national level, but at the end of the day it was his QE initiative that led to very, very important results. And to me, of all the talk about the president of the commission and so on, the most interesting job that needs to be filled, and I look forward to seeing the debate within the ECB taking place and the decision being taken place in the next few months, is who will fill his place. Who will be the new governor of the European Central Bank? And that will give a clear signal to where Europe is heading. What will be of the Eurozone and what type of model will be used for the Eurozone. So thank you for allowing me to share this couple of thoughts with you.